When my brother raised his glass that Christmas night, I didn't know the words leaving his mouth would slice through me sharper than any knife I'd ever held. The fire crackled, the silver shimmered, and laughter floated like perfume around the table. "Still washing dishes, Lena," he said, his grin wide enough for everyone to see. My father chuckled, swirling his drink. "At least she's doing something productive," he muttered. I smiled not because I wanted to, but because every muscle in my face had learned how to hide. The Hart family Christmas banquet was never really about Christmas. It was a performance all glitter and gossip, a parade of success stories told between sips of champagne. That year the house gleamed brighter than ever, crystal chandeliers, gold ribbons, the scent of roasted duck and pine wood hanging in the air. I arrived late, snow still melting in my hair, wearing the same black dress I'd owned for 3 years. My brother Ethan noticed. He always did. "Late again," he said as I took my seat. "Traffic, no," I replied softly, sliding into the only empty chair at the far end. "Work." "Oh, right," he said, smirking. The restaurant thing. The restaurant thing. That's what he called it, as if the place I built from nothing, the kitchen I bled and sweated for, was a hobby I'd get bored of. To him, I was still the little sister who'd quit college, the disappointment who spent her days smelling like garlic and dish soap. To everyone else at that table, I was invisible, a stain on their perfect portrait. Mom passed me the breadbasket without a word. The diamond on her wrist caught the light, a flash of cold brilliance that matched her silence. My father, Harold Hart, filled his plate and started his usual speech about legacy and discipline. "A family's worth is built on success," he declared. "That's why I'm so proud of Ethan. His real estate firm is already expanding to Dallas." Applause, toasts, laughter. I picked at my food. When I was younger, I used to imagine these dinners differently. I thought maybe one day they'd notice how much I loved cooking, how alive I felt in a kitchen. I'd spend hours at Grandma Rosa's side, watching her transform simple ingredients into warmth. But in this house, food wasn't art. It was a service. Cooking was for the help, not for hearts. So I smiled, while they talked about stock markets and property investments. I nodded when my father asked Ethan about his upcoming partnership. I stayed silent when Mom mentioned in her perfect hostess tone, "Lena's still doing that little catering work, aren't you, dear?" "Yes," I said. "Still cooking." That drew a few polite smiles, the kind people give before changing the subject. Then came the question that made the room colder. Ethan leaned forward, grin sharp as glass. "So tell us, sis, do you still wash your own dishes?" The table erupted in laughter. Even my father joined in murmuring, "Every job has its dignity, I suppose." I stared at my plate. The roasted duck, the cranberry sauce, the mashed potatoes. Perfect. Sterile. Lifeless. And then I laughed too. Just once. Because if I didn't, I'd cry. No one noticed my hands trembling under the table. No one noticed how tight my chest felt, how my throat burned from holding back every word I wanted to throw at them. No one noticed because they never had. When the laughter died down, I excused myself and stepped out into the cold night air. The snow had stopped, but the chill still bit at my skin. From the window, I could see them still laughing, still drinking, still perfect. Inside that house, I had always been the ghost in their family portrait. I walked toward my car, heels crunching on ice, and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. For a moment, I just breathed. The radio flickered on some soft jazz tune that didn't belong to me. I turned it off. Silence was better. My phone buzzed a notification. A review. Someone had posted about my restaurant Hidden Gem. The Luna truffle pasta changed my life. I stared at the screen. A single tear rolled down my cheek, not of sadness, but relief. Someone out there had seen what my family never could. I started the car and drove through the sleeping streets of Austin. The city lights blurred in the windshield, streaks of gold and blue smearing into memory. I thought about the kitchen, my kitchen still warm from the night's last order. The smell of butter and truffle still clinging to the air. That was home now. Not this family, not that house. When I got back to the restaurant, the sign Hart's Table glowed softly against the dark. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The quiet wrapped around me like a blanket. There were still dishes in the sink, stacks of plates, saucepans, spoons, and without thinking, I began to wash them. Warm water, soft soap, the rhythmic clink of porcelain. It calmed me. As I scrubbed, I remembered Grandma's voice. Never be ashamed of clean hands, Lena. They mean you've built something real. And for the first time that night, I smiled a real one. I didn't know that in less than a year, Forbes would call me the Culinary Billionaire of the Year. I didn't know that the world would one day eat the very dishes my brother mocked. All I knew standing there with my hands in warm water was that I wasn't broken. Not yet. Not ever. The snow outside glittered under the streetlights, melting into silver puddles. I leaned against the counter, the faint hum of the fridge the only sound. Somewhere deep inside, something shifted, not anger, not pain, but promise. They laughed, I whispered to the empty room. Let them. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead, steady and bright. I took a clean plate, placed it on the counter, and whispered the name of the dish that would change everything, Luna truffle pasta. It wasn't just food. It was my story, a recipe built from every humiliation, every burn, every broken heart. And as the first scent of truffle filled the air, I knew that someday they'd taste it too. The city was asleep. The stars hung low. I turned off the lights, locking the door behind me, and looked up at the sky, quiet, endless, full of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. That night they thought they'd laughed at me. But really, they'd just lit the fire that would feed the world. The next morning I woke to the smell of burnt toast and the hum of Austin traffic outside my apartment window. The city was alive again. Food trucks rumbling down 6th Street, morning joggers with earbuds, the faint chorus of life starting over. I stood barefoot in my tiny kitchen, holding a chipped mug of coffee, staring at a stack of unpaid invoices on the counter. The sunlight hit the paper like an accusation. Running a restaurant wasn't glamorous. It was survival wrapped in grease and hope. Every morning began the same way: inventory checks, supplier calls, recipe notes scribbled on napkins. The staff called me Chef Lena, but in truth I was also the plumber, the accountant, the janitor, and sometimes the therapist. The restaurant hearts table was my heartbeat, but it was also bleeding me dry. Morning, boss. I turned to see Noah, my sous chef, poking his head through the back door. He was 26, tattooed, and forever late, but he could dice onions faster than anyone I'd ever met. You burned the toast again, I said. He grinned. Adds character. I rolled my eyes, pouring another cup of coffee. We need to talk about the product order. The truffles didn't arrive yesterday. Noah sighed. The supplier's truck broke down near Waco. They'll send them tomorrow. Tomorrow. Always tomorrow. In this business, tomorrow was a luxury I couldn't afford. The truffles were my signature, the heart of Luna truffle pasta. Without them, I couldn't serve the dish that had slowly begun drawing people in. Food bloggers wrote about it like it was alchemy, like I'd bottled the moon and melted it into butter. But to me, it was something simpler. It was proof. The lunch rush came fast. By 11, the smell of caramelized onions filled the air. The kitchen buzzed, pans, sizzling knives, chopping, the call and response of cooks moving like dancers in a routine only they understood. I loved that sound. It reminded me that no matter how chaotic life got, there was still rhythm here, still music. At 1 o'clock, a woman sat alone at table 5. Mid-50s, silver hair, pearls, though not the kind my mother wore for attention. These looked earned, lived in. She ordered the Luna truffle pasta. When I brought the plate out myself, she smiled. "You're the chef?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," I said, setting it down gently. "Is everything all right with your meal?" She took a bite, closed her eyes, and nodded slowly. "This tastes like Christmas morning at my grandmother's house." Her words hit me harder than any award could. After she left, I found a note folded beneath the check. "Never forget, good food tells the truth, even when people don't. M." That night after closing, I sat alone in the darkened dining room. The city lights shimmered through the windows, painting the walls in gold. I thought about that woman's note, how truth sometimes hides in the simplest flavors. I wondered if my family would ever taste that kind of truth. I remembered my brother's laughter at the banquet. Still washing dishes, Lena, yes. I was still washing dishes, but every plate I scrubbed carried my name now. My phone buzzed again, an email from a food journalist I'd met months ago at a farmer's market. The subject line read, "Feature request independent women in culinary." I opened it, my hands trembling slightly. "We're highlighting women redefining American dining. I'd love to include your story and your dish, the Luna truffle pasta. Are you available for a brief interview?" I leaned back in my chair, exhaling. Maybe, just maybe, the world was starting to notice. The next morning came too fast. The smell of espresso replaced sleep. I met the journalist, a tall woman named Amelia, at the restaurant before opening. She carried a small recorder and a smile that felt more genuine than I was used to. "Everyone's talking about your truffle pasta," she said. "But what I'm really curious about is why you named it Luna." I hesitated. The name wasn't random. When I was little, I said my grandmother used to wake me up before dawn to help knead dough. We'd cook under the moonlight coming through her kitchen window. She told me, "The moon sees what the sun ignores." I guess I wanted to honor that the quiet work, the kind no one claps for. Amelia's eyes softened. "That's beautiful," she whispered. When she left, I stood for a long moment looking around the empty dining room. The air still smelled faintly of truffle and lemon. I thought of my father's voice again. Success is built on numbers, not feelings. He never understood that my success was built on something else entirely. Taste, patience, love, and the refusal to give up. That night, Ethan called. It was rare, almost suspicious. "Hey," he said, his tone too casual. "Mom wants to know if you're coming to Dad's birthday dinner next month." I hesitated. "Why?" he chuckled. "Family tradition. You can bring your apron." "Funny," I said, keeping my voice even. "Tell her I'll think about it." "You do that," he said before hanging up. The moment the line went dead, I felt the old ache stir again, the one that never quite went away. No matter how far I ran, my family's shadow stretched long behind me. I walked into the kitchen, flicking on the lights. Stainless steel gleamed under the fluorescent glow. I began chopping onions, letting the tears come under the guise of the smell. Each slice was a heartbeat, each breath a vow. I wasn't done. Not yet. Around midnight, Noah returned from a supply run carrying a crate. "Look what I found," he said, pulling out a small wooden box. Inside, truffles, dark and fragrant. "Got them at half price. Guess Christmas came early." I smiled, the exhaustion fading just a little. "Then we celebrate," I said. "With what pasta?" I said simply. "Always pasta." We cooked together in silence, the kitchen filled with warmth and steam. When the dish was ready, I tasted the sauce, creamy, earthy, alive. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was close. Noah leaned against the counter. "You ever think about why you do all this? The hours, the pressure, the family drama." I didn't look up. Because food listens when people don't. Outside, the wind howled softly against the glass. I thought of my brother's voice, my father's smirk, my mother's silence, and then I thought of the woman at table 5, the one who said my food tasted like home. That night, I wrote something new on the chalkboard hanging by the kitchen door. "Every plate is a story. Make sure yours is worth tasting." I stood there a while, staring at the words until the chalk dust clung to my fingertips. In a world that measured worth by wealth, I was building mine with flavor. They haven't seen it yet, but soon they would. When I finally turned off the lights, the last thing I saw was the reflection of the truffle pasta in the glass pale gold under the moonlight streaming through the window. It looked like victory waiting to be served. The letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, tucked between bills and junk mail. My name was written in my mother's flawless cursive, the same handwriting she used for Christmas cards and dinner invitations. I almost didn't open it. I hadn't heard from her in nearly a year, not since I'd left the family house with a single suitcase and a box of recipe cards. But curiosity won. Inside was a thin sheet of ivory paper that smelled faintly of lavender. The words were polite, too polite. "Your father and I hope you are well. Ethan mentioned your restaurant. We're pleased you found something to keep you busy. Christmas dinner will be at the house, as always. Please RSVP. There was no, we miss you. No, we're proud of you. Just a formality written like a business memo between strangers. I set the letter down beside a stack of invoices and laughed quietly. Something to keep me busy, I repeated under my breath. Busy. Like cooking from dawn till midnight. Building a dream from scratch, keeping a dozen employees afloat was just a hobby. Noah came in carrying a crate of fresh produce. You okay, boss? Fine, I said, slipping the letter into the trash. Let's prepare for lunch. But the words stayed with me all day. Heavy, stubborn things that clung to the corners of my mind. By noon, the restaurant filled with the scent of simmering stock and garlic butter. The first customers trickled in locals mostly. There was something sacred about watching strangers eat food you'd created, how their faces softened with that first bite, how conversation slowed as taste took over. But that afternoon, I wasn't really there. I burned the caramel, oversalted the soup, dropped a pan. Noah finally grabbed the ladle from my hand. Whatever's eating you, chef, spit it out before it burns the place down. I sighed. Family. Ah, he said, nodding like he understood everything. The one recipe you can't fix. I laughed despite myself. They invited me home. For Christmas. That's good, right? Not really. It's not an invitation. It's an inspection. He didn't press further, but that night after we closed, he left a small gift on my counter, a glass jar filled with truffle salt wrapped in parchment paper. A note tied to the lid read, "For the people who said you'd never make it. Keep seasoning your story." The next morning, I took the jar home. It sat on my windowsill, catching the light like something sacred. For weeks, I debated whether to go. The thought of facing them again, their judgment, their polite condescension, made my stomach twist. But something deeper inside me whispered, go. Not for them. For yourself. In the days leading up to Christmas, business at Hart's Table picked up. The journalist's article had gone live online titled, "The Woman Who Brings the Moon to the Table." It spread faster than I ever imagined. Reservations doubled overnight. Someone even sent flowers, white lilies, and a note. Your food speaks louder than their silence. I worked harder than ever, staying late into the night. The staff laughed, played music, and tried to keep me grounded. But my mind was elsewhere, back in that house with its cold marble floors and louder-than-life laughter. On Christmas Eve, I closed early. The snow fell softly outside, blanketing the streets in quiet light. I stood at the counter, staring at the clock. 8:03 p.m. If I left now, I could make it before midnight. Going somewhere, Noah asked, leaning against the doorway. Home, I said. He raised a brow. You sure? No, I admitted. But I'm going anyway. The drive was long and silent. Austin's skyline disappeared in the rearview mirror, replaced by dark stretches of highway. The radio played an old Christmas song, but I kept the volume low. Every mile closer made my pulse quicken. When I finally turned into the Hart driveway, the house looked exactly the same. Warm light spilling from the windows, the same wreath on the door. I parked at the edge of the driveway and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. My reflection in the glass looked calm, but my hands trembled. Mom opened the door before I could knock. Lena, she said, smiling like nothing had ever been wrong. You came. I said I would. Well, she said, stepping aside. Come in. Dinner's about to start. The smell of roasted lamb and rosemary filled the air. The table was already set, crystal glasses, linen napkins, silver cutlery polished to perfection. My father sat at the head, reading something on his tablet. Ethan was by the fireplace, laughing with a woman I didn't recognize. Lena, he said, his voice dripping with forced surprise. Didn't think you'd show up. Neither did I said. His fiancée, tall, immaculate, wearing a sequined red dress, smiled thinly. I've heard so much about you. The chef, right? Yes, I said. The one who washes her own dishes. The words slipped out before I could stop them. Ethan's smile faltered. My father cleared his throat. Let's not make this evening about work, he said. It's Christmas. We sat. The conversation flowed, or rather, it moved in circles around me. Ethan spoke about his new developments, his investors, his upcoming partnership with a luxury chain. My mother asked him about the engagement party. No one asked me anything. The same patterns, the same hierarchy. I caught my reflection in the silver teapot on the table, small, quiet, out of place. But this time, the feeling didn't sting. It felt temporary, like the end of a story, not the beginning. When dessert arrived, my father finally turned to me. "So, Lena," he said, "your restaurant is doing modestly well?" I smiled. "Better than modestly." Ethan chuckled. "Oh, come on, Dad, you've seen her place. It's cute, cozy. Perfect for birthdays and takeout." Their laughter filled the room, and yet somewhere inside me a calm I didn't recognize settled in. I looked at Ethan, his manicured confidence, his hollow pride, and I felt nothing but distance. For years I'd wanted to prove myself to them. I wanted them to see me, but now I realized I didn't need their validation. My success didn't require their applause. When I left that night, snow was falling again. My mother hugged me at the door, a gesture that felt both familiar and foreign. "Drive safe," she said. "Always," I replied. Back in the car, I sat for a long time before starting the engine. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the photos of my restaurant, my team laughing in the kitchen. Kids from the cooking class we hosted for charity, a line of customers waiting in the cold for a table. That was my family now. As I drove away, the house grew smaller in the rearview mirror until it vanished completely. The snowflakes blurred into streaks against the windshield. By the time I reached Austin, it was almost dawn. I parked outside Hart's table and unlocked the door. The air inside was still warm, faintly scented with truffle and thyme. I turned on one light and sat at my usual corner table. On a napkin, I wrote the first sentence of a letter I'd never send, "Dear Mom and Dad. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just free." I folded the napkin, placed it under the truffle jar, and smiled. Outside, the first rays of sunlight touched the restaurant sign, my name glowing softly beneath it. Christmas morning had come. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the forgotten daughter. I felt like someone who had finally come home. The fire started on a Thursday night, the kind of night that looked ordinary until it wasn't. The restaurant was closing, the last customers had left, and the soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound left in the room. I was in the kitchen scrubbing the counters when Noah called out from the pantry. "Smell that?" he asked. At first I thought it was just the truffle oil heating too long, but then the air turned thick and sharp. Smoke crawled along the ceiling, curling into the fluorescent lights. My heart kicked hard against my ribs. I ran toward the back, and that's when I saw it, a small orange glow under the oven hood, flickering like a heartbeat. Noah grabbed the extinguisher. He didn't hesitate. We'd done drills, but drills don't prepare you for real fear, for the sound of metal popping, or the way heat presses against your face, trying to shove you out of your own space. The extinguisher hissed white foam, spraying over the flames, but it wasn't enough. Smoke filled the air, choking and hot. I grabbed my grandmother's recipe book from the counter, instinct, not reason, and ran for the door. The fire alarm screamed above us. Outside, the winter air hit like a slap. I turned back just in time to see the windows glowing red, the sign, "Hart's Table," flickering through the haze. Fire trucks wailed down the streetlights, spinning across the asphalt like chaos in motion. I stood there shaking, watching everything I'd built burn. The firefighters worked fast, but by the time they cleared us to approach, the damage was done. The kitchen was blackened. The walls were soaked. The air smelled like loss. One of them, a young woman with tired eyes, patted my shoulder. "You're lucky, chef. Could have been worse." I nodded, unable to speak. Lucky. That's what they called it. Noah sat on the curb beside me, his face streaked with ash. "It's just stuff," he said quietly. "We can rebuild." But I wasn't sure I believed him. I didn't cry. Crying would acknowledge the size of the hole that had just opened up. Instead, I felt only a vast, cold emptiness, the kind of stillness that follows a gunshot. My kitchen, my sanctuary, was now a hollow mouth choked with the smell of wet soot and burnt dreams. It wasn't just wood and steel that had burned. It was my grandmother's memory, every 18-hour shift, every tiny triumph I had scraped together. The ash tasted like betrayal, a final cruel joke played by fate. The aggressive cold of the night air was a shock after years of being defined by the heat of that stove. The sign Heart's Table was barely visible through the grime. I thought of my father, and the irony was so sharp it almost brought me out of the numbness. The fire he always warned me I would crash into had finally arrived, but it hadn't come from ambition. It came from a faulty wire. It was meaningless. That night I didn't go home. I stayed in the parking lot until the last truck left, until the flashing lights faded and the silence returned. I looked up at the moon, full pale and distant, and whispered, "What now?" The next morning the story hit the local news. Downtown Austin eatery damaged in fire. No injuries reported. They called it an accident. I called it the end of everything. Insurance would take weeks, maybe months. We didn't have that kind of time. Rent was due. Employees depended on me. The thought of letting them down made me sick. By noon, my phone was filled with messages. Some were from customers. "So sorry, chef. Let us know when you reopen." Others were from people I hadn't heard from in years, suddenly interested in my story because tragedy sells. Even Ethan texted, "Heard about the fire. Tough luck. Maybe it's a sign." A sign. Of course he'd say that. He'd always believed failure was fate, something only weak people earned. I threw the phone onto the counter and took a long breath. The smell of smoke still clung to my clothes. Later that afternoon, Noah showed up at my apartment with takeout and a look that said he wasn't leaving until I ate something. "Get up," he said. "You can't fix anything on an empty stomach." We sat on the floor eating noodles from cartons. He talked about ideas, a pop-up, a fundraiser, a temporary kitchen. I just listened. My body was there, but my mind was still inside the smoke. "You're not hearing me," he said finally. "You always tell us, every setback is just seasoning. So what's this one, chef?" I looked at him. Burnt toast. He laughed, and for the first time that day, I almost did too. We finished the noodles, but the small apartment felt suffocating. After Noah left, the metallic scent of smoke clinging to my coat and hair was a constant suffocating reminder. I walked over to the stack of recipe notes, the ones I hadn't managed to grab from the counter, and sifted through them. They all smelled like ash now. The truth was, I felt paralyzed. The kitchen was my armor, my war paint, my silent language. Without it, I was just Lena Hart again, the girl who failed college. The disappointment. It wasn't until 3 a.m. sitting on the cold floor that I picked up my phone again. I saw Ethan's cruel text. Maybe it's a sign. I closed my eyes. No, I thought. A sign is something you read. This is a beginning you have to write. That thought, simple and stubborn, was the only thing that kept the numbness from winning. 2 days later, I was back at the restaurant. The landlord gave me 2 weeks to decide whether I was staying or terminating the lease. The walls were still stained black, the ceiling half collapsed, but the sunlight through the broken window painted everything in gold. I walked through the wreckage, slowly touching the counters, the chairs, the ruined pans. My fingers found the truffle jar. Noah's gift cracked but not shattered. The salt inside still sparkled. Something in me stirred. A pulse. A whisper. "You're not done." That night I made a decision. We cleaned what we could. I called every supplier, every customer, every friend I had. I told them we weren't closing, we were rebuilding. Within hours, the community showed up. Farmers brought produce. Former customers offered donations. Volunteers scrubbed soot off the walls. It was chaos, but it was hope. By the 3rd day, we'd set up a temporary outdoor kitchen in the parking lot. The wind was freezing, but we lit heaters and brewed soup. People came, strangers, neighbors, old regulars. We called it the Phoenix Table. I ladled out bowls of Luna truffle soup to anyone who stopped by. The aroma of truffle oil and roasted garlic filled the air, covering the smell of ash. A local journalist filmed the crowd. The next morning her headline read, "From the ashes she serves." That article changed everything. Donations poured in. Messages from other chefs, investors, even celebrities flooded my inbox. For the first time, the fire didn't feel like an ending. It felt like proof. One evening, as I wiped down a folding table, Noah handed me his phone. "You might want to see this," he said. It was a photo from a national food blog, Hart's Table, the restaurant that refused to die. Underneath a line read, "Chef Elena Hart's Luna truffle soup tastes like resilience itself." I laughed, shaking my head. They're romanticizing a mess. Maybe, Noah said. But it's a beautiful mess. When the insurance finally cleared weeks later, the landlord gave us permission to rebuild. Contractors started showing up: painters, electricians, designers. I spent nights sketching new layouts on napkins, reimagining every inch of the place. But one thing would stay the same, the dish that had carried me through everything: Luna truffle pasta. The night before reopening, I stood alone in the rebuilt kitchen. The walls gleamed again, white and gold, untouched by the fire's scars. In the corner sat my grandmother's recipe book, the one I had carried through the smoke. I opened it, fingers trembling, and found the same page marked by heat and memory. "When life burns your kitchen, start with salt and heart." Her handwriting looked fragile now, but alive. I pressed my hand to it and whispered, "And this time, I'll start with my name." Outside, the workers were mounting the new sign. I stepped through the door just as they pulled the tarp away. The letters caught the early morning light, warm and clean: Luna's table. No longer my family's table. No longer their pride or their control. Just mine, built from ashes, named after the moon that watched me through every dark night. When the first snowflake fell onto the glass, I smiled. It wasn't the same restaurant anymore. It wasn't the same woman either. This time the story began with me. The day Luna's table opened its doors, Austin woke to a pale winter sun, quiet, silver, and forgiving. The frost on the windows shimmered like the edge of a dream, and inside, the scent of butter and rosemary drifted through the air. Noah leaned against the counter, grinning. "So, Chef, Luna's table. Huh? You finally made peace with the moon," I smiled, tying my apron tighter. "The moon and I have a deal. She rises, I cook." He laughed. "Then let's make her proud." When we flipped the sign to open, people were already waiting outside. Not for the Hart name, for mine. The name they'd seen in the paper, the name on the jar of Luna truffle sauce that had survived the fire. Every step inside the kitchen felt lighter. No ghosts lingered here anymore, only the sound of sizzling pans and the hum of a dream rebuilt from smoke and faith. We didn't advertise. The only announcement had been a handwritten sign on the window: "We're back and we brought the fire with us." Inside, the kitchen roared to life. The sound of sizzling hands, the clang of ladles, the hum of voices. It was chaos and rhythm, just the way I liked it. Every plate that left my hands felt like a heartbeat. A woman in a red coat sat near the window watching me with a faint smile. When I brought her the Luna truffle pasta, she said softly, "You were on the news." "Guilty," I said. She twirled a forkful, took a bite, and sighed. "This tastes like someone forgave the world." I didn't know what to say, so I just smiled. Maybe she was right. Maybe I had. By noon, the dining room was full. I barely noticed the fatigue setting into my arms, the burn of the stove, the ache of motion, because for the first time the noise didn't feel heavy. It felt like home. When the last table cleared, I stepped outside into the cool afternoon air. Across the street, a familiar car idled. The window rolled down and Ethan leaned out. "Well, look at that," he said. The little bistro survived the blaze. I froze, wiping my hands on my apron. "You came all the way here to mock me in person." He grinned. "Relax, sis. I was in the neighborhood. Thought I'd see what all the fuss was about." "There's a wait list," I said. "Maybe try again next month." He smirked, eyes flicking toward the sign. "Cute name." "Still think it's a phase, no," I said evenly. "It's a legacy." He didn't reply. Just stared for a second too long before driving off, leaving exhaust and silence behind him. That night, when the kitchen finally quieted, I sat at the counter with a cup of chamomile tea. My hands were trembling again, not from exhaustion this time, but from the storm Ethan's visit had stirred up. No matter how much distance I put between us, his voice still found a way to echo. Noah came in wiping his hands on a towel. "You good?" "Yeah," I said, though I wasn't sure. "Family check-in." He nodded slowly. "You don't owe them your peace, you know." I wanted to believe that. I really did. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived, this time embossed with gold lettering. Inside was an invitation, the Austin Culinary Awards, honoring excellence in innovation. The nomination had been submitted months ago when my restaurant was still legally registered under the old name. My heart jumped. Recognition from the same city that once ignored me felt strange, almost unreal. But excitement tangled with fear. Success had always come with shadows in my life, and I could already feel one forming. The night of the ceremony, I wore black again, not out of habit, but as armor. Noah joined me wearing the only suit he owned. When we entered the ballroom, the air shimmered with perfume and ego. Every chef critic and investor in Texas seemed to be there. At our table sat people I'd once cooked for as a line cook, now shaking my hand with smiles they hadn't worn before. I recognized the type. They loved you only after everyone else did. As the speeches began, I caught sight of someone near the stage. A tall man in a navy suit, hair slicked back, confidence radiating like heat. "Ethan." I froze. What was he doing here? Then the host spoke his name. Ethan Hart, CEO of Hart Development Group, one of our evening's sponsors. Of course. He wasn't here to celebrate with me. He was here to make sure the spotlight didn't forget him. When they announced my category, my pulse raced. The presenter read the nominees, pausing before the winner. And the award for Best New Restaurant goes to... A pause. My heart held still. Hart's table. Applause erupted. I stood stunned as Noah clapped me on the back. The lights felt too bright, the air too thin. I walked onto the stage, accepting the trophy that carried my old burden, my new victory. When I reached the stage, Ethan was already there, holding the trophy, the sponsor's privilege. He handed it to me with that same smirk. "Looks like the family name still opens doors," he whispered. I took the trophy without looking at him. "No, Ethan. It was the one you closed that made me build my own." The room went quiet for half a breath before the applause rose again. The cameras flashed, and for a moment I couldn't see him anymore, only light. Later that night, back at the restaurant, I placed the trophy on the counter. The team gathered around, cheering, clinking glasses, laughing too loud. But when the noise faded, I stayed behind alone. The kitchen was still. I turned on the stove and dropped butter into a pan, watching it melt and hiss. The sound was grounding. I reached for the jar of truffle salt and sprinkled a pinch. The scent filled the room, warm, earthy, familiar. Cooking was still the one thing that made sense. It didn't ask for applause. It just demanded the truth. As I plated the pasta, I thought of my grandmother's voice, soft and sure. "Feed them kindness, even when they've starved you of it." I carried the dish to the window, looking out at the city. The streets shimmered with rain lights, reflecting like molten gold. Somewhere out there, Ethan was probably celebrating too, his version of success, his illusion of control. But in that quiet kitchen, holding the spoon in my hand, I finally understood something he never would. Success isn't measured by who claps for you. It's measured by who you become when no one does. The pasta glistened under the light. I took one small bite, letting the flavor bloom, truffle cream, salt, and memory. It was everything I'd ever fought for. Outside, thunder rolled softly across the skyline, the promise of another storm. I smiled. I wasn't afraid anymore. Storms, after all, had taught me how to build fire. The local award was gasoline on the fire. It didn't just open doors, it tore the walls down. Overnight, Luna's table went from a regional darling to a national story. I spent the weeks following the ceremony, doing interviews, flying to New York for a quick feature on a business news network, and trying to keep the kitchen grounded amidst the chaos. Noah had to hire 2 more line cooks just to manage the rush. My father's calls grew more frequent, and my mother's emails were less about politeness and more about managing my brand. I knew the family was watching, but I didn't care. I was too busy building. It was a Sunday morning when the envelope arrived thick and ivory with my family's crest embossed in gold across the flap. I didn't need to open it to know it would ruin my peace. My last name, Hart, still had a way of finding me even after I'd buried it beneath Luna's table, beneath smoke and salt and survival. I stood at the kitchen counter, coffee cooling in my hands, staring at it like it might catch fire if I blinked. Noah walked in still in his beanie, holding a bag of fresh herbs. "You look like you're about to fight someone." "Maybe I am," I muttered, sliding the envelope toward him. "Guess who finally remembered I exist?" He scanned the return address, whistled low. "Hart family crest. Fancy. What is it?" Another inheritance fight. I cracked the seal open. Inside the card gleamed with ornate lettering, the kind that smelled like money and pretense. "Mr. and Mrs. Richard Hart cordially invite you to the Christmas banquet at the Hart residence." At the bottom, in perfect handwriting that twisted my stomach, was my brother's name, hosted by Ethan Hart and fiancée Charlotte Mills. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. So that was it. He was getting married. And of course I was invited, not as family, but as a trophy of forgiveness. Noah read the invitation over my shoulder. "Christmas banquet, huh? Sounds like your personal version of hell." "Worse," I said quietly. "It's staged forgiveness. Ethan never invites without a purpose." I dropped the invitation into the trash, but the sound of it hitting the metal echoed too loudly in the small room. That night I dreamed of our old house, the long dining table, the smell of my mother's candles, Ethan's laughter cutting through my words. I woke with the memory of his smirk, the one he always wore when he called me for help. The next morning I found the invitation back on the counter. Noah must have pulled it from the trash. "You should go," he said when he saw my glare. "Excuse me," he shrugged. "You always say, your food tells your story, right? Maybe it's time they hear it straight from the source." I hated that he was right. But what he didn't understand was that I didn't cook for them anymore. I cooked to forget them. Days passed, but the invitation haunted me. Every time I wiped down a table, every time I folded a napkin, I saw those golden letters. By Christmas Eve, I'd convinced myself not to go. Then Maggie, my mother, called. "Lena," she began, her voice smooth but fragile, the way porcelain sounds right before it breaks. "Please come home for one night. Your brother insists." "Why?" "Because it's Christmas," she said, like that word still meant something. I nearly hung up, but something in her tone, hesitation, maybe guilt, stopped me. So I said yes. The mansion was just as I remembered, too bright, too polished, too full of ghosts pretending to be people. The doorman looked at me like he wasn't sure I belonged there. Inside, laughter floated from the dining hall. A string quartet played near the fireplace. The air smelled like roasted duck pine and expensive wine. I spotted Ethan instantly center of the room. Flawless as ever, his arm around Charlotte, the picture-perfect fiancé in a silver gown. When he saw me, his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Well, if it isn't my little sister," he said loud enough for half the room to hear. Still washing dishes, a few guests chuckled politely. My father looked away, pretending not to notice. My mother reached for her glass instead of her voice. I smiled. "Still building towers that crumble." He blinked, surprised. But before he could respond, Charlotte leaned in with her champagne, laughing too brightly. "Ethan told me you're in culinary, right? That's adorable." Adorable. Like I was a child playing in the kitchen with plastic plates. "Something like that," I said. "How's interior design treating you?" She tilted her head, smiling stiff. "Oh, it's not really working. It's passion." "Same," I said. My father interrupted, clinking his glass. "Let's all take our seats, shall we?" Dinner was an orchestrated show. Fine china, crystal glasses, silver cutlery so reflective it could slice light. Every dish was prepared by some Michelin star chef flown in from New York. I stared at my plate, a tower of sculpted lamb and foam that looked like art but tasted like arrogance. Around me, conversations hummed: stock prices, wedding venues, European travel. I felt invisible, and yet every glance toward me felt like judgment. Halfway through the meal, Ethan tapped his glass with a knife. Before dessert, he announced I'd like to toast to my family, especially my sister Lena, who finally decided to show up. Laughter rippled across the table. I froze a smile nailed to my face. He continued, "You know, folks, she's a chef now. Spends her nights scrubbing pans and tasting soup. I guess hard work really does build character." The words landed like stones. My stomach turned. My mother's eyes flickered with discomfort, but she said nothing. My father looked proud, as if Ethan's cruelty was just good humor. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could, a phone rang. It was Charlotte's. She answered confused, then her face shifted from confusion to shock. "Ethan," she whispered, "you might want to see this." She turned the screen toward him. The room leaned in curiosity, thick as smoke. There it was, on every news app, every feed Forbes magazine. The chef redefining Southern dining. My photo, my kitchen, my name. The room went silent. Ethan's face was drained of color. My father's fork clattered against his plate. My mother's hand trembled over her wine glass. Charlotte stammered, "Lena, is this you?" I nodded slowly. "Still washing dishes," I said. "But I own the sink now." No one spoke. Even the quartet faltered. Ethan's champagne glass slipped from his hand, shattering across the marble floor. The sound echoed through the hall. I rose from my chair, the air around me trembling with all the words I'd swallowed for years. "You raised your glasses for my brother," I said quietly. "Tonight, raise them for the woman you never believed in." And then I left. Outside snow fell silently onto the front steps. I didn't look back. The mansion glowed behind me, full of stunned silence and broken pride. For the first time in my life, the night didn't feel cold. Somewhere deep inside, I knew this was more than justice. It was peace, the kind you cook slowly, season with time, and serve only when it's ready. The night after the Christmas banquet, I didn't sleep. My phone buzzed until dawn calls emails headlines. Forbes names Luna Hart, the culinary billionaire, who redefined American dining. Every outlet wanted a statement, an interview, a quote about my meteoric rise. But I didn't want to speak. I just wanted silence, the kind that used to fill the kitchen before dawn, when only the hum of the refrigerator kept me company. By the time sunlight spilled across my apartment, I had 52 unread messages and one missed call that made my heart stop. "Mom." I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "Lena," she breathed when I picked up, her voice trembling. "Your father, he saw the article. He hasn't spoken since dinner. You embarrassed him." I laughed softly. "Embarrassed him, Mom? He's been embarrassing me for 30 years. "Please," she said, "don't make this worse. Ethan is devastated. You should have told us about your success." "Why?" I said quietly. "So you could dismiss that too." Her silence was louder than anything she could have said. Then, with a sigh that sounded like defeat, she whispered, "You've changed Lena." I almost smiled. Finally, when I hung up, I didn't feel angry, just a strange, aching relief. For once, I didn't crave their approval. At Luna's table, the lunch rush was already building. The scent of roasted garlic and thyme filled the air, the kind of smell that grounds you when the rest of the world feels static. Noah handed me a cup of coffee, eyes gleaming. "Congratulations, billionaire," he teased. "Guess that means I get a raise." I rolled my eyes. "You get a day off." He grinned. "That's worth more." We both laughed, but underneath the humor was a quiet understanding everything had changed. The restaurant phone didn't stop ringing. Reporters wanted interviews. Investors wanted meetings. Everyone wanted a piece of what they'd once ignored. By afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up outside. 2 men in tailored suits stepped out, followed by a woman in a red coat with the kind of posture that said she was used to walking into rooms that stopped for her. She extended her hand. "Elena Hart," she said. "I'm Vivian Lee from Forbes." I froze. "You're real." She smiled. "So are you. We'd love a follow-up story, a feature about your journey, your brand, your next move. Our readers are obsessed. My next move. I hadn't even thought that far. I'd spent so many years trying to prove I could stand on my own that I didn't know what came after victory. "Can we schedule something next week?" Vivian asked. In New York, I hesitated. The thought of being in that city surrounded by the kind of people who once laughed at small-town dreamers like me made my stomach twist. But this was an opportunity to redefine my story before someone else did. "Sure," I said finally. "Next week." After she left, Noah leaned on the counter. "You're really doing this, huh? National spotlight." "I guess so." "You okay? I don't know," I admitted. "I thought I'd feel vindicated. But all I feel is tired." That night, I closed the restaurant early. The streets of Austin were quiet, the Christmas lights still hanging, blinking softly in the wind. I walked along the river, the city reflected in the water like a dream I'd already lived. That's when I heard footsteps behind me. "Lena." "Ethan?" I turned slowly. He looked different, his hair messy, his usual confidence cracked. He wasn't the polished man from the Banquet anymore. He was smaller somehow, as if life had finally caught up with him. "Why are you here?" I asked. He shoved his hands into his coat pockets. "To apologize, I guess. Not that it'll change anything." "It won't," I said. He nodded. "I deserve that. Look, I shouldn't have said what I said at dinner. Or ever, really. You didn't deserve it." "Which part?" I asked. "The years of mockery or the public humiliation?" He flinched. "All of it." We stood there in silence, the cold air biting between us. "Dad's furious," he said. "Mom's pretending it didn't happen. The board's calling nonstop, my company's losing investors. I'm not doing great. Why tell me?" "Because you're the only one who never wanted anything from me," he said quietly. "And I still treated you like nothing." I looked at him, Gilly, looked at him. For the first time, he wasn't the golden boy, the untouchable heir. He was just a man facing the ruins of his own ego. "I didn't do any of this to hurt you," I said. "I built something because no one believed I could. I don't need your apology, Ethan. I need you to learn." He nodded, his jaw tight. "Maybe one day I will." As he turned to leave, I called out, "Ethan." He stopped. "Next time you think someone's beneath you, remember what the view looks like from the bottom." He didn't respond. Just walked away, his footsteps fading into the sound of the river. When I got home that night, I sat at my table, the same one I'd eaten takeout on when the restaurant first opened, and opened my grandmother's recipe book. There, in her faded handwriting, was a note I'd somehow missed all these years. "The heart and the moon are sisters. One burns, one reflects. Both light the way." I traced the words, tears blurring the ink. She'd written it for me long before I knew I'd need it. Over the next few days, the world around me shifted faster than I could keep up. Orders doubled. Investors lined up. The city declared Luna's Table a landmark for sustainable dining. But beneath the noise, something quieter began to stir inside me, something that wasn't about revenge or recognition. It was peaceful. The kind you earn only after walking through fire. On New Year's Eve, I stood in the kitchen long after everyone had gone home. I plated the last dish of the year, a simple bowl of Luna truffle pasta, and set it on the counter. Outside fireworks exploded over the city, bright against the black sky. I raised a glass of champagne to no one in particular and whispered, "To silence, to salt, and to second chances." For a moment, the reflection in the window didn't look like the girl who once washed dishes in other people's kitchens. It looked like the woman who built her own. New York in January didn't feel like the city of dreams, it felt like a test. The wind clawed at my face as I stepped out of the car in front of the Forbes building. Steel and glass rose into the gray sky like ambition made solid. I adjusted my coat, breathing out a cloud of fog, and told myself that I belonged here. Inside, everything gleamed. The lobby smelled like coffee and money. A receptionist recognized my name immediately. "Ms. Hart?" "Oh, sorry, Ms. Luna," she corrected herself quickly. "They're expecting you upstairs." That name still made me smile. Luna. I'd chosen it to free myself, but sometimes it still felt fragile, like a new scar healing over an old wound. The elevator doors opened to a floor lined with framed covers of legends, people who had changed the world in their own way. My face was among them now. The visionary chef who turned fire into fortune. I stood there staring for a moment, feeling both proud and oddly detached. Vivian Lee. The editor who had reached out greeted me with a grin. "Lena, you're a sensation. You've inspired thousands, especially women who thought they'd missed their chance." I smiled politely. I didn't mean to be a symbol. I just wanted to cook. "That's exactly why it worked," she said. The interview started smoothly. Questions about Luna's table, sustainability, leadership, the emotional journey. But halfway through, Vivian leaned forward, voice soft. "Can I ask you something off the record?" "Sure." "Your family," she said carefully. "You didn't mention them once. Are they part of this story?" I hesitated. The air in the room felt heavy. "They're part of how it started," I said slowly. "Not how it ends." She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "That's powerful. Sometimes silence says more than an interview ever could." When the camera shut off, she walked me to the window. Manhattan stretched below like a glittering promise. "You could open anywhere now," she said. "Paris, Tokyo, Dubai. You have the kind of name that travels." The idea should have thrilled me. Instead, it made me uneasy. Expansion meant control, more people, more money, more pressure. I'd built Luna's table to be personal, human. Could it survive becoming an empire? That night at my hotel, I couldn't sleep. My phone kept lighting up with notifications, business proposals, licensing offers, invitations to galas. Each one came with a $sign attached, and each one felt like a chain. I turned off my phone and went to the window. Snow was falling again, soft and quiet. Somewhere below, a food vendor was still serving soup from a steaming pot. People lined up laughing, eating in the cold. That simple joy was what had started all of this. The next morning, I met with investors at a sleek restaurant near Central Park. The table gleamed with polished silverware, but the food was soulless, more performance than pleasure. A man with a Rolex leaned forward. "We want to franchise Luna's table. National rollout. Every major city. Fast, efficient, scalable." He spoke about numbers, margins, and projections. Every word made my stomach twist tighter. "And the ingredients?" I asked. "The farms, the local sourcing," he waved his hand. "We'll handle the supply chain. You handle the name. That's the brand now, you." Noah's voice echoed in my mind. "You don't owe anyone your piece." I leaned back, fingers tapping against my glass. "I think you're confusing my restaurant with a product." The man blinked. "You're turning down the deal. I'm protecting what I built." He smirked. "Emotion doesn't scale, Ms. Luna." "Neither does integrity." I said, standing up. "Lunch is on me." I left the contract untouched on the table. Outside, the cold felt cleaner than the air inside. Later that afternoon, I stopped by a small bakery in the village, a place that reminded me of home. The smell of cinnamon hit me the second I opened the door. Behind the counter stood a woman in her 60s, flower on her hands, kindness in her eyes. "You look tired, sweetheart," she said. "Big city wearing you down already?" I smiled faintly. "Something like that." She poured me coffee and slid a pastry across the counter. "Eat. You can't fight the world hungry." I laughed softly. "You sound like my grandmother." "Then listen to her," the woman said. "The world's full of people who'll tell you to grow bigger. Few will remind you to grow true." Her words stayed with me long after I left. That evening, Vivian called. "You're trending again," she said. "Everyone's talking about how you rejected a multi-million-dollar deal. Some call you a visionary. Others say you're foolish." "Maybe I'm both," I said. "You'll need to choose which story you want the world to believe," she said gently. I looked out the window at the city lights, thinking of my brother, my parents. The banquet table that once silenced me. "I think the story's already written," I said. "It just took me a while to find my voice." When I returned to Austin 2 days later, the air smelled like rain and cedar. Luna's table was humming with life again, laughter spilling from every corner, candles flickering against the windows. Noah met me at the door. So he asked, "How's the big city treating our girl?" "It tried to buy me," I said. He grinned, "And I'm not for sale." We stood there for a moment, just listening to the kitchen knives chopping oil, sizzling, someone laughing in the back. It was music. My kind of music. Before closing that night, I wrote something on the chalkboard near the entrance where we usually listed the specials. In big white letters, I wrote, "Stay small enough to feel the heart, big enough to feed the world." The next morning, a customer took a picture of it and posted it online. By evening, it had gone viral. Thousands shared it, tagging #Luna's Table, #Visionary Chef. Truth over profit. For the first time, I realized that maybe my real empire wasn't about restaurants or fame. It was about people who believed that kindness could be served on a plate, that dignity could taste like rosemary and hope. And maybe, just maybe, the light I'd fought for wasn't meant to shine on me. It was meant to help others see. The first headline appeared 3 weeks after I came back from New York. Heart Development faces investigation for fraudulent reporting. I was drinking coffee in the quiet of Luna's Table before opening hours when Noah slid his phone across the counter toward me. "Guess who's on the front page again?" he said grimly. I didn't have to ask. Ethan's face stared up from the screen, framed by flashing cameras and the kind of hollow stare I'd seen once before, the night of the banquet, when his pride cracked for the first time. I didn't feel satisfied. Just a strange weight in my chest, like the air before a storm. By noon, the news had exploded. Investors pulled out, partners went silent, and rumors flew faster than facts. Heart Development collapses. The empire crumbles. From mogul to defendant. Noah leaned against the counter, reading aloud from one of the articles. Apparently, he leveraged property he didn't even own. Millions in debt. I stared out the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. "He always built too fast," I murmured. "Too high, too proud. Dad used to say the same about me." "Yeah," Noah said softly. "The difference is, you learned to build from the ground up." The door chimed, breaking the tension. My mother stood there, drenched from the rain, her hair disheveled, her eyes red-rimmed. I hadn't seen her since the banquet. For a moment, she just stared at me, as if deciding whether she was allowed to exist in this space. "Mom," I said, stepping forward. She flinched at the word. "Lena!" I didn't know where else to go. I guided her to a chair, poured her tea. Her hands shook as she held the cup. "It's all gone," she whispered. "The company, the house, the cars. Your father's heart." Her voice broke. "He's not well. And Ethan, he won't talk to anyone." I sat across from her, unsure how to feel. Part of me still remembered every dismissal, every time she told me to be quiet while Ethan spoke. But looking at her now, small and frightened, I saw the woman behind the armor. "Where is he?" I asked. She met my eyes. "The courthouse. He has a hearing today." By the time I arrived, the sky had turned the color of steel. Reporters swarmed the steps, shouting Ethan's name. He looked like a ghost suit, wrinkled tie, crooked, his once confident smile gone. When his eyes met mine, something inside him faltered. "Lena," he said, his voice cracking. "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," I said quietly. Inside, the courtroom was cold. The air smelled of dust and regret. I watched as the charges were read: fraud, misrepresentation, misuse of investor funds. Each word struck like a hammer. Ethan didn't look at anyone, not even our parents sitting in the back row. When the hearing ended, he walked out like a man half alive. Outside, the cameras flashed. He shielded his face, but the noise followed him like a swarm. I waited by the car until the reporters finally scattered. He stopped a few feet away, soaked in rain, his breath visible in the cold. "You came to gloat," he said. I shook my head. "No. To see if there's anything left of the brother I knew." He laughed hollow. "There's not much left of anything." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said, "You won, Lena. You got everything you ever wanted. I just hope it was worth it." I didn't win, I said quietly. You lost yourself. His jaw tightened. Maybe, but at least when I fell, the world noticed. You spent your whole life trying to be seen. I don't need them to see me anymore, I said. I just needed to see myself. He looked away, rain dripping from his hair. You sound like her. Who, Grandma? He said bitterly. Always preaching about humility and heart. Guess neither of us listened until it was too late. I wanted to reach out, but he stepped back, shaking his head. Don't pity me, Lena. I built my kingdom. I burned it down. That's on me. And then he was gone, swallowed by the rain. That night I stayed late at Luna's table, unable to shake the image of him standing alone on those courthouse steps. The restaurant was empty except for the faint hum of the refrigerator and the soft drip of the leaky faucet. I opened my grandmother's recipe book again. The same page I'd read 100 times stared back at me, her handwriting steady and sure. The heart and the moon are sisters. Below it, I wrote my own line. And even fallen stars can find their way home. 2 days later, I found a letter slipped under the restaurant door. No return address, just my name. Inside was a single folded sheet of paper, Lena. I sold the last thing I had, my watch. The one Dad gave me when I joined the firm. I'm heading somewhere quiet. Maybe it's time I learned to build something that isn't made of steel and lies. If you ever want to talk, you'll find me where the world forgets to look. E. I sat there for a long time, the letter trembling in my hands. For the first time in years, I cried for him, not the man he became, but the boy who once slipped me cookies under the dinner table, who dreamed of flying before the world taught him to climb. Later that night, a storm rolled over the city. I stood at the window watching lightning split the sky and realized something simple but absolute: forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means no longer needing revenge to feel whole. I whispered into the storm, I forgive you, Ethan. The next morning, sunlight broke through the clouds. The air smelled clean, almost new. I walked into the kitchen early, rolling up my sleeves. There were reservations to prepare for deliveries, to check a day to start. But before turning on the stove, I lit a candle near the window, a small one, golden and steady. It wasn't for celebration. It was for peace. As I stood there, I imagined Ethan somewhere far away, maybe fixing an old boat, or planting something that could grow. And I hoped that wherever he was, he'd finally found a table of his own, one built not from pride, but from the quiet work of redemption. Because sometimes, even when the golden boy falls, the story doesn't end. It just starts again, one small, honest flame at a time. The restaurant was quiet when my parents walked in. It was a late afternoon in February sunlight, slanting through the windows, painting the tables gold. I hadn't spoken to them since the courthouse. When I saw them standing there, older, smaller somehow, I almost didn't recognize them. Table for two, I asked, forcing a calm I didn't feel. My mother smiled faintly. Actually, we were hoping for three. My father stood behind her, leaning on a cane I'd never seen before. His once commanding presence had softened into something fragile. He looked around the restaurant, eyes tracing the brick walls, the soft lights, the handwritten quote on the chalkboard. "This is your place," he said, voice quiet. "Your mother told me about it." I didn't believe her until now. I crossed my arms. "What changed your mind?" He sighed. "Reality. And time." I nodded toward an empty table near the window. "Sit." We didn't speak for a while. I poured them tea, herbal, no sugar, just the way my mother used to drink it on quiet Sundays before the chaos of our family swallowed those moments whole. My father's hands trembled as he lifted his cup. He looked at me, then down at the steam rising between us. "I read your interview," he said finally. "The one in Forbes. You said something about cooking being a language of forgiveness." "I did." He nodded slowly. "I didn't understand it then. I think I do now." My mother's eyes glistened. "Lena, we made mistakes. So many. We thought we were protecting you, preparing you for the world. But we were just trying to protect our pride." Her voice cracked and she reached across the table, hesitating before her fingers touched mine. "I'm sorry." The words hit harder than I expected. For years I'd rehearsed what I would say if this moment ever came. But now that it was here, all those imagined speeches dissolved. "I spent years trying to earn your approval," I said quietly. "Every dish I cooked, every late night, every scar on my hands, it was all for you. Until one day it wasn't." My father looked down. "I know. And I don't expect forgiveness." "Then why come here?" He smiled sadly. "Because I didn't teach you how to be strong, but you taught me what strength actually looks like." The kitchen door swung open behind me and the familiar hum of Luna's table came to life. I could smell roasted vegetables, butter, and the faint sweetness of bread in the oven. My home. My sanctuary. I stood. "You're not leaving without eating." My father chuckled softly. "I was hoping you'd say that." I tied on an apron and disappeared into the kitchen. My staff looked at me surprised. "Chef, you're cooking tonight?" "Just one meal," I said. "For my family." I chose the ingredients carefully: fresh basil, truffle oil, handmade pasta. The same dish that had built everything, the one that had carried me from humiliation to hope. Luna truffle pasta. As the butter melted in the pan, I thought about the years I spent in kitchens. No one cared about the nights I cried over burnt sauce and broken dreams. Every failure had brought me here to this exact moment. When I plated the dish, I added one final touch, a drizzle of lemon oil, the way my grandmother had taught me. It wasn't perfect. It was peaceful. When I set the plates down before them, neither spoke. They just looked at the food, then at me. My father took the first bite. His eyes closed. "I see why they call you a genius." "It's just pasta," I said. He smiled faintly. "No, Lena. It's a story." We ate in silence for a while, but it wasn't awkward. It was something softer, an unspoken truce. Afterward, my mother reached for her purse and pulled out a small box. Inside was a bracelet. Simple silver, nothing like the pearls she used to wear. "It was your grandmother's," she said. "She wanted you to have it when you were ready." "I think you are." I touched the cool metal, feeling tears rise. "Thank you." My father stood slowly, his cane tapping against the floor. "Your brother? He called last week," he said. "He's working at a community rebuild project in New Mexico. Manual labor. Says it feels good to build something with his hands." I exhaled. "Good. He asked if he could write to you." I hesitated, then nodded. "He can try?" They both smiled. For the first time in years, their smiles didn't feel like performances. They felt human. When they left, my mother hugged me tight. "You've built a home, Lena," she whispered. "Not just for others, for yourself." After they were gone, I walked back to the kitchen. The staff was cleaning up, laughter echoing through the walls. Noah stood at the counter drying glasses. "Everything okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Yeah. For the first time, I think it is." He smiled. "Then we should celebrate." "How?" He handed me a glass of wine. "To Luna's table," he said, raising it. "The home we never had, and the one we finally found." I clinked my glass against his. To home. Outside, dusk settled over the city. The lights along the street flickered on one by one until the whole block glowed. I looked at the restaurant sign through the window, Luna's table, and felt the warmth of belonging spread through me like sunlight after a storm. Later, after everyone had gone, I walked through the empty dining room, touching the backs of the chairs, the edge of the bar, the curve of the window. Every inch of this place carried a memory, laughter, tears, beginnings. I stopped by the chalkboard and wrote one final line beneath the quote I'd written months ago. "Sometimes the home you're searching for is the one you build with your own hands." Then I turned off the lights, stepped outside, and locked the door. The moon was high silver and patient. I looked up at it and smiled. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was chasing the light. I was standing in it. The invitation came wrapped in black and gold. I found it waiting on my desk one morning, elegant, expensive, deliberate. The National Culinary Honor Gala, it read, followed by my name printed in silver letters, Lena Luna, Honored Guest of the Year. For a moment, I just stared at it. I'd spent half my life invisible at tables like that, refilling glasses for people who never saw me. Now they were asking me to sit at the head of one. That night I stood before my mirror adjusting the collar of my black dress. My hands trembled not from nerves, but from something deeper. This wasn't fear. It was the quiet reckoning of someone returning to a battlefield long abandoned. The gala was held in a ballroom in downtown Austin, not far from where everything had once fallen apart. The air shimmered with perfume and polished ambition. Crystal chandeliers spilled gold across tables draped in white linen. People laughed too loudly, the sound bouncing like champagne bubbles against marble walls. When I stepped in, the conversations paused for half a second, just long enough to make the silence noticeable. Then came the whispers. That's her, the visionary chef. The one from Forbes. Didn't her brother go bankrupt? Noah was already there, standing by the bar in his gray suit. He caught my eye and gave me a small nod. You ready to play nice with the sharks? I smirked. I brought my own armor. The evening unfolded in waves of speeches and small talk. Faces I half remembered from my early years in the industry came up to congratulate me, some genuine, others sharp-edged with envy. I smiled through it all the way one does when walking through a room full of ghosts. Halfway through dinner, the host called my name. The spotlight hit me like heat. Please welcome Lena Luna, he said, the visionary behind Luna's table. A name that's redefined American cuisine. The applause was thunderous. I rose heart-pounding and walked toward the stage. My heels clicked against the marble floor, each step echoing like punctuation marks in a story only I could hear. At the podium, the light was blinding. I could see faces, but not expressions. 1,000 eyes waiting. I took a breath. 10 years ago I began. I was washing dishes in a restaurant that no longer exists. I thought that was the end of my story. Turns out it was only the prologue. A ripple of laughter, polite but sincere. I've learned that food isn't just what we serve, it's what we survive. Every burn, every cut, every rejection, it flavors who we become. And sometimes the heat that nearly destroys us becomes the fire that defines us. Silence stretched through the room. Even the waiters paused mid-step. I was told that cooking was a lowly job. Those kitchens were for people who didn't make it elsewhere. But tonight, I'm standing here because of that kitchen, because of the people who believed that honest food could change lives. I saw Noah in the crowd, his arms crossed, smiling quietly. I built Luna's table. Not to prove them wrong, I continued, but to prove something to myself, that dignity can be plated and kindness can feed more than hunger. A few people stood. Then a few more. Applause erupted, not the polite kind this time, but the kind that shakes a room. I stepped down from the stage, the warmth of that moment still buzzing in my chest. But just as I reached the edge of the crowd, someone caught my arm. Lena. It was Ethan. He looked thinner-tanned, dressed simply in a clean white shirt and worn blazer. His eyes, once sharp with arrogance, were calm, now steady quiet. I wasn't sure you'd come, I said. Neither was I, he admitted. I've been volunteering at a shelter nearby. One of the cooks recognized you on the flyer. You came all this way? He shrugged. I thought I should see for myself. The sister I used to mock is now changing the world one meal at a time. His tone wasn't bitter, it was almost proud. I heard about Dad, he added softly. Is he okay? He's better, I said. He still asks about you. He nodded, eyes glistening. I'll call him. I think I'm ready to stop running. We stood there suspended in the noise and light. It felt like the room had faded, like all that remained was the space between us, a space filled with the echoes of everything unsaid. I'm sorry, he said, voice cracking. For the things I said that night. For all of it. I looked at him, really looked at him. The pride, the fear, the boy he used to be. I forgave you a long time ago, I said. He smiled faintly. You always were the stronger one. Before I could answer, the host's voice boomed again. Ladies and gentlemen, dessert is served, Luna's signature truffle pasta. Ethan laughed softly. Of course. Your empire, your rules. It's not an empire, I said. It's a table. There's room for everyone. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Then maybe one day I'll earn a seat. As he turned to leave, I called after him. You already have one. The rest of the night passed in a blur of laughter, congratulations, and the rhythmic hum of celebration. But when I finally stepped outside into the cool night air, everything went still. The city glowed beneath 1,000 lights. I walked to the edge of the balcony, wind tugging at my hair. Somewhere in the distance, fireworks cracked open the sky. Noah joined me a moment later holding 2 glasses of champagne. You did it, he said. Did what came full circle. I smiled. Feels more like a spiral. Every turn just takes me higher. He clinked his glass against mine. To the fire inside, he said. To the fire that doesn't burn, just transforms, I replied. We drank in silence, watching the night unfold gold wild and free. When the last burst of fireworks faded, I felt something shift deep in my chest. It wasn't pride or relief. It was peace, the kind that only comes when you stop fighting to be seen and start choosing to be. The girl who once scrubbed dishes until her hands bled was gone. In her place stood a woman who built her own light and shared it freely. For the first time, I didn't feel like a survivor. I felt like home. The night after the gala, I couldn't sleep. The applause still echoed somewhere in my chest, fading slowly like the sound of waves retreating from shore. I walked downstairs to Luna's table. The restaurant was dark except for the faint glow from the kitchen, the same kitchen that had once been nothing more than ashes and blueprints. I turned on the single overhead light. The gleam of steel, the smell of truffle oil faintly clinging to the air. It was home. I rolled up my sleeves and began to cook. No cameras, no crowd, no critics. Just me, the pan, and the rhythm of the spoon scraping the bottom. That's how it always began for me, in silence. As the sauce simmered, I thought about the path that had led me here, the laughter at the Christmas banquet, the sting of humiliation, the fire, the fall, and every small mercy that came after. I'd wanted revenge once. I'd wanted them all to see what they threw away. But standing there stirring the sauce under a quiet moon, I realized something simple and profound. I didn't need to win anymore. I just needed to be. The door creaked behind me. You're still here. Noah's voice was sleepy, warm, familiar. I smiled without turning. Couldn't sleep. He leaned against the doorframe, hands in his pockets. You know, most successful entrepreneurs spend nights on yachts or in penthouses. You're here making pasta at 2 a.m. I'm not the most successful entrepreneur, I said. He grinned. Thank God for that. I ladled 2 portions into bowls and slid one toward him. Eat. It's better when shared. We ate standing at the counter, steam fogging the air between us. Do you ever think about what's next? He asked. I used to think next meant bigger, I said. More restaurants, more headlines. Now I think it just means quieter. He nodded. A smaller circle. Deeper roots. Outside, the first light of dawn began to touch the horizon. It poured through the window, turning the floor to gold. Noah set down his fork. You built something that outlived the noise, Lena. You didn't just feed people, you healed them. You healed yourself. I looked down at my hands, the faint scars tracing my fingers like old roads. It took me too long to learn that success isn't about how loud the world claps. It's about how at peace you feel when it's quiet. The doorbell rang just then, unexpectedly. I wiped my hands and opened the front door. A delivery truck stood there, engine idling softly. A woman in an apron handed me a basket. From the kids' kitchen program, she said. They wanted to thank you for teaching them last month. Inside the basket were hand-drawn cards, crayon-scribbled sons' smiling faces, one that read, Thank you, Chef Luna, for showing us we could cook dreams too. My throat tightened. I whispered a soft thank you as the woman waved and drove off. When I turned around, Noah was smiling. Looks like your legacy's already cooking itself. I laughed quietly. Guess so. Hours later, the restaurant filled with the morning hum, fresh bread, baking phones, ringing staff trickling in. The day was like any other, yet something about it felt final. Not an ending exactly, but the closing of a circle. I went to my office and opened the window. The spring air drifted in, carrying faint music from the cafe across the street. I pulled out the old recipe book, my grandmother's, and turned to the first page. The ink had faded, but her handwriting still felt alive. Food is love made visible. Below it I wrote, "And love once shared never fades." Later that evening, the restaurant buzzed with life. Families talked over steaming plates. Couples clinked glasses. Laughter rippled through the air. I moved between tables, stopping to chat, to taste, to adjust a plate here or there. When I reached the last table near the window, I froze. It was my brother, Ethan. He sat with 2 kids and a woman I didn't recognize, smiling, relaxed, his hands dusted faintly with flour. He looked up and met my eyes. For a second, we just stared. Then he raised his glass in a quiet toast. I nodded, smiling. No words were needed. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was peaceful. Later that night, after the last guests had gone, I stood outside under the stars. The sign above the door glowed softly, Luna's table. I traced the letters with my gaze, feeling their weight and lightness all at once. This name wasn't just a brand anymore. It was a promise. To cook with heart. To forgive what burned. To rise again. I thought about all the people who had once laughed, all those who doubted, and how irrelevant they felt now. Not because I had proved them wrong, but because their voices no longer mattered. Behind me, Noah called out, "We are locking up, Chef." "Yeah," I said. "Let's go home." But before turning the key, I added one last note on the chalkboard by the door. For anyone who's ever been mocked for dreaming, may your table always be full and your fire never go out. Then I stepped into the street where the night was cool and the city hummed softly alive with stories. As I walked, I thought of my grandmother's kitchen, my parents' dining room, the fire that destroyed everything, and the moon that watched it all. And for the first time I understood the meaning of it all. Revenge fades. But creation endures. It wasn't the humiliation that defined me. It was the hands that rebuilt after. The meals that healed. The courage to feed even those who once starved me of love. The moon hung above, bright and silent, its silver light spilling over the city like forgiveness. I looked up, whispered, "We did it," and smiled. Because in the end, it wasn't about Forbes or fortune or even family. It was about freedom. And that night, under the quiet sky, I finally had it. If you've ever been laughed at for chasing your dream, don't let them have the last word. Cook it, build it, write it, turn it into light. And if my story meant something to you, share it, tell someone who needs to hear it. Because stories like meals aren't meant to be kept, they're meant to be served.